Hello and welcome to Rotten Reviews, and today I'd like to talk about 1997. It's a year that brought us a whole lot of really great horror movies. We had Scream 2, I Know What You Did Last Summer, Wishmaster, Cube, Event Horizon, so on and so forth. But I'm not here to talk about any of those right now. Instead, I'd like to actually take a look at a little bit of a smaller movie, a bit of an indie darling known as Office Killer. Directed by Cindy Sherman, this is a movie that hasn't aged terribly well, at least in its major plot points, taking place in a magazine as it's making a transition from very old technology to more modern computers, and the struggle between print media and the future of, well, what that actually means. But at the same time, somehow this is actually more resonant than ever, because a big portion of this movie actually takes place with not only this transition of technology, but also instead of laying people off at this magazine, they're actually just cutting their hours, moving them to part-time, and transitioning them to work from home. And working from home is something that I am all too familiar with in the last year, so I was kind of watching this, and it was just a little bit of a funny itch that got scratched with this. And in this magazine taking place within this movie, we are introduced to the character of Doreen, played by the legendary Carol Kane, as she's playing a very meek copy editor that is basically just kind of there. She blends into the background, she's very milquetoast and keeps to herself, but she does her job and she does it extraordinarily well. But with these changes, she is not very good at adapting to them. Meanwhile, we have the character of Kim, who is not only adapting very well to the changes, but is one of the driving forces of them, played by Molly Ringwald. And the two kind of butt heads as Doreen is trying to figure out how to cope within this, while also being a bit bullied by various people throughout the office. And you might be able to tell where this goes from here, as Doreen starts picking them off one by one. Now, this is a movie that was kind of infamous for its time when it came out because of how gruesome it proclaimed itself to be. And I have to say that although the kills themselves aren't really that spectacular in terms of any kind of gore or anything along those lines, it's what happens after the kills, as Doreen takes it upon herself to say, well, if I'm going to work from home, then I may as well, one by one, move the office in with me. That's what winds up getting the gore gold ribbon in my book, and it's not an over-the-top excessive amount. I've certainly seen more brutal movies than this, but it's more than you would think it would be, and I would have to say that it's not, although it's gruesome, it's not gritty. It doesn't have a very realistic feel. It's almost a little bit more whimsical and fun. And for a late 90s horror movie, the idea of having a gore-filled fun time is not necessarily a bad thing. Now, some people might be kind of turned off by some of the aesthetics of this film above and beyond the gore. It is an indie movie, and it does kind of look like it. It has a very gritty kind of film quality to it, but it also makes use of that by having a lot of really odd angles and very sharp colors to it. It provides a slightly unnerving and discombobulating sense of the office as we're kind of going through this storyline, and I honestly think that it works to the film's credit. It feels small, but rightly so. Everything about it feels really kind of intimate, and not in a claustrophobic way, but more in a cozy, rain-soaked night Chicago coffee shop kind of way, and I dig that. I actually really like the way this looks. As far as the storyline, it's pretty what you see is what you get. There's really not a whole lot of terrible surprises to it. It's pretty much Carol Kane as Doreen, picking them off one by one in gruesome fashion and moving them into her house, and the situations that kind of arise from there. But again, just like the aesthetic, I think it ultimately does serve the film well. It's not meant to have a whole lot of layers of depth to it, but even so, it actually does manage to eke out some level of character background to things. But aside from those little tidbits we get of Doreen's backstory, it really is kind of these characters existing within their own little microcosm of a world, not really having a life outside of this magazine and outside of this movie. And ordinarily, I would actually treat that as to be a bit of a negative for a film, but again, within the intimate confines of this setting, this plot, and this camera style, I actually think that it works pretty well. This movie isn't really trying to be anything other than what it is, and what it is a very entertaining, competent horror movie done on a shoestring budget back in the late 90s. And for that, I really have to tip my hat and give it my recommendation if you're in the mood for something that's a little bit smaller, a little bit quieter, a little bit more intimate, and perhaps a little bit more gruesome that's going to linger on the gore shots more than the traditional slashers of the late 90s that are going to be serving a little bit more towards the MPAA side than the audience side just to kind of get that R rating under control, then this is the movie for you. It's a sleeper, but I consider it to be a hidden gem that more people should watch. Thank you so much for watching this. I look forward to seeing you on my next movie review. Remember, next time you want to watch a horror film, first make sure that it's good and rotted.